Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast. Did you know that the Campaign for Historic Trades, which is powered by Preservation Maryland, is the sponsor of 3 registered apprenticeship programs? The campaign also hosts workshops across the nation, maybe even one in your backyard. Visit historictrades.org to learn more and find a way to learn a trade. This is Nick Redding. You are once again listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're lucky to have on the president and CEO of the Historic Savannah Foundation, Collier Neeley, and we're going to be talking with him about his path to preservation and the work of the Historic Savannah Foundation, a true legacy organization when it comes to historic preservation here in the United States, and about all that they're doing down in that lovely city. But before we get there, just a reminder for people listening to PreserveCast, make sure that if you've enjoyed what you're listening to, that you rate, review, subscribe, and also share the podcast. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and you're on social media, please feel free to share the podcast. We want to kind of grow the listenership here. And you can find the whole back catalog, of course, of other podcasts that we've done at preservecast.org. And look for monthly episodes of Revolution at 250, a special production of PreserveCast, all 2026, where we'll be diving into the legacy of the 250th. But back to today's episode, sitting down with Collier Neeley, the president and CEO of Historic Savannah. Collier, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up, and what led you to your interest in preservation?
Yeah, Nick, thanks for having me. It's good fun to come on podcasts like this. So I'm from Montgomery, Alabama, born and raised, and I came into historic preservation through my grandmother. Her name was Collier Neeley. She was a fairly prolific historian, local historian in Montgomery, and she ran the Landmarks Foundation of Montgomery for about 32 years, which included kind of building this architectural zoo that sees 30,000 fourth graders there in Montgomery called Old Alabama Town. That talks about a lot of vernacular architectural styles in Alabama and Alabama history. And so that was my playground growing up. And then, of course, like I think a lot of people who get into this field, traveling and visiting various historic sites around the country. My grandmother also really enforced that. So we, did all the Civil War battlefields around Alabama. We went to Williamsburg. We did a couple big trips to DC. She took us through Charleston, Savannah, St. Augustine, just any historic place in the Southeast. She just about drug us to. And those experiences kind of add up over time. And then coming out of high school, I went to the University of Mississippi, so hotty toddy to everybody out there. And I had the idea that I wanted to be a history professor. And that was, right after the financial collapse. My freshman year was 2009. And the academic history field was changing, and I recognized that pretty quickly and started talking with my grandmother and some of her friends who are architects. There's some people like Mark McDonald would come to mind there, who I'm now sitting in his chair, and just realize that, hey, there's an opportunity to still be a historian, but practice it in a more practical sense. And that's where I found historic preservation. So when I graduated from Ole Miss, I went to Georgia State in Atlanta that has an incredible historic preservation program and public history program, and kind of straddled the fence between preservation and public history there for 2 years, dabbling in a little bit of both. But it was my time at the Historic Oakland Cemetery. and a little history museum way out in West Texas in Abilene, Texas, called the Buffalo Gap History Museum. I think its name has changed now to the Taylor County History Museum. And an internship out there that really like kind of landed me on, oh yeah, historic preservation is where it can be and where I want to be. And so working with Oakland for a little while, I then got a job with the Alabama Historical Commission. So in many ways, as Bear Bryant said when he left Texas A&M to go to Alabama, Mama called, and so I listened and went home to work for the Alabama Historical Commission, and did 3 years there as the National Register coordinator and easements coordinator. Got on the board at the Landmarks Foundation. Was also working really closely with this really awesome organization that's a statewide nonprofit in Alabama called Your Town, Alabama. It's a remnant of an old endowment for the arts program that was kind of ran alongside the Main Street program in the 80s. That is a workshop, an asset-based planning workshop that kind of trains and creates citizen planners, and really started to see the marriage, the relationship between community planning and historic preservation, and how vital one is with that, or how vital they are together, to see neighborhoods, to see communities, to see small towns, and even in large cities kind of find ways to revitalize themselves. And so really got involved with Your Town and ended up on the board and still on that board, even though I'm over here in Georgia now. For a long time. And then 2019 came around, and the outgoing executive director for the Landmarks Foundation was retiring, and the board asked me to be the interim director for a little while. And I was like, yeah, it's a good time to transition out of government work, and let's use this as a landing place while I kind of figure out what's going to happen next. And was lining up a consulting gig actually. But as I started doing my grandmother's old job, I realized that I really liked it and wanted to keep doing it. And so I put my name in the hat for the full-time deal, and they like immediately turned around and hired me.
So it's interesting because so many people that we talk to, it's a circuitous route to preservation. Or they learn about it maybe a little bit later, or there's some of that in your story, but you're one of the first that I think we've talked to where I don't want to say like a legacy, but you actually have like a parent, grandparent involved in preservation, and that I think we'll probably see more of that in coming years as preservation becomes more of a standard career path. But we don't run into a lot of people who are like, well, my parent was a preservationist, and then I kind of went into the family business in a way. So I think that is unique. We don't see, having done like 380 of these episodes, I can't think of a lot of them where that's the case. So that is unique. And I have to ask, is your grandmother still living? Is she aware of what you're up to now?
No, she passed away in 2018, unfortunately. But she did know that I was in the field and getting deep into it while I was at the historical commission. But I joke that I got into the family business. Yeah.
Yeah. She must be, I'm sure she's very proud, and was then as well, to know that you were going into that, and obviously taking it in a different direction than probably she would have in her generation, when it came to preservation. So you go from Alabama to, and you mentioned, and we've mentioned that you're in Georgia now at Historic Savannah Foundation. That job came open. And how long have you been with Historic Savannah now?
Yeah, so I haven't been here very long. I started in August. I was with Landmarks for 5 years, got it through the pandemic, and then saw this really unique opportunity to transition to, I think, as you called it, a legacy organization.
Yeah, that's maybe a good place to kind of segue to the organization. Some people listening, I imagine many people listening, are familiar with it, but we have listeners all across the globe, and so some may not be familiar with it. first, let's talk about, why don't you define what Savannah is, and then we can talk about the Historic Savannah Foundation. So what is, if somebody was coming in from out of town or from out of the country and you were trying to describe what they would expect when they came into Savannah, how would you describe that community?
Man, it's an extremely unique place that has a very European feel, but it is very American in that way. The, the Oglethorpe plan is the character defining feature of Savannah, with its squares, its trust lots, its tithing lots, and the way that the city is laid out, especially in the landmark district between the river and Forsyth Park. But that legacy of the Oglethorpe plan extends south, south of Forsyth Park into the more recent neighborhoods, and it's very unique and very apparent as soon as you get here. And I think it's one of the things that really attracts people to Savannah.
And how much, I mean, if somebody were visiting or you're trying to paint the picture of Savannah today, talk a little bit about the fabric of the historic districts. So many historic districts across the nation, have faced significant loss, or, they're, I don't want to say pockmarked, but there are pieces that are still there and retain a lot of integrity. There are some pieces that aren't. What status, or what's the state of the historic district and the historic districts, I should say, in Savannah?
Yeah, I mean, it's in pretty good shape considering it was listed in 2017, in 2017 by the National Park Service as a threatened status for its eligibility as a National Historic Landmark District. Since then, a lot of changes have happened. We've been able to find those character defining places and features within the overall plan of the district, correct some of the mistakes that were made in the past. But I mean, like a lot of American cities, there was at one point it was facing urban renewal and just like a complete destruction of the downtown. And a bunch of people got together and said, hey, we're not going to let that happen, and really focused on preserving the Oglethorpe plan. And that's kind of the legacy and responsibility that we have today as stewards of the city.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, I think for some people who are really familiar with Savannah, they might think like, well, what's left to preserve, right? Like I walk around it. I mean, it's a city that I think, like Charleston, like New Orleans, it's in some ways its history is so iconic, it's being loved to death. It says everybody wants to be there, everybody wants to visit it, and so you've got the pressure of visitation, you've got the pressure of affordable housing, and how do you get people who work in Savannah to be able to live in Savannah, and all those things kind of come together there. What is today the work of the organization? And then maybe we can take a step back too and talk about what it was historically, or you can take that either direction if you want to talk about the founding of it and then where you are today.
Yeah, so I'm going to start there just because the founding of it, we carry that responsibility, right? So we made a lot of investment into the landmark district into downtown. Through the revolving fund and with other private property owners and partners that we had there, and then invested in a lot of the historic districts south, particularly the Victorian district and what's known as Thomas Square Streetcar District. So moving into the late 90s, 2000s, kind of up to where we are now, we start seeing this tourism pressure. And there are appropriate regulatory steps that were made, especially after the pandemic, to ensure that hotels are going into appropriate places, that the height of these places is not overscaling the downtown. Downtown Savannah is a very human scale place, and that's the vital piece of the Oglethorpe plan, in the way that Oglethorpe laid it out. Now, really what HSF is focusing on is a handful of things. One is, an inclusive and open interpretation in the Davenport House, and using the Davenport House as a entry point to preservation for regular folks who might not really fully grasp what historic preservation is or how vital it is to Savannah's economy, and creating a third place for the community. So that there is social connection, that we are coming together, and then recognizing, okay, here's some of the issues that Savannah's facing long term with over tourism, with housing development, And from there, we're really using it as an opportunity to engage the community on a broader scale. At the same time, we still have the revolving fund. It's still active. And right now we're kind of asking two questions like, all right, where are the biggest points of need when it comes to preserving the historic places in Savannah? One is this affordable housing question that is definitely exists. And we'll touch on kind of how even the revolving fund is kind of put out of the historic districts because they've gotten so expensive. At the same time, because the historic districts have gotten so expensive, maintenance of these buildings is vital, and we still need to focus in these places because preservation just doesn't end. It's not like, okay, we're done, we've preserved everything. It's like, oh wait, no, this is an ongoing, future-looking project, and we need to have a really long-term perspective on this because the city's almost 300 years old now, and if it wasn't for a long-term perspective that the founders of the city took, we wouldn't be here today. So we have to take that same outlook, and part of that's investing in the people who own properties. So right now we are kicking around the idea of like a more formalized loan program, facade loan program that can help owners of historic properties, particularly homeowners who live in their houses, or folks who have small scale residential rentals, like no more than like 4 units.
So, I mean, that's a good place for us to take this conversation in that, I in my mind, and maybe I've got it a little bit wrong, but I think I've got it right, is that Historic Savannah was sort of the innovator of revolving funds. Like the whole idea of revolving funds comes from the work that Historic Savannah was doing. I know that, PreserveCast is powered by Preservation Maryland, the statewide preservation group in the state of Maryland. And we have records in our history talking about people from Historic Savannah come and speaking to a group of business people in like the 70s in Baltimore and talking about how this is something that they could do as well. So you were not just doing it for Savannah, you were out like proselytizing across the country, which is amazing, right? Like that's it's not just a legacy for Savannah, it's a legacy for so many others that were doing this work. So maybe tell people who are listening who, maybe they work in a museum, they're just not familiar with this real estate tool. What is a revolving fund? And then I want to kind of get into, and I can follow up with some questions on that, like how is it working today? Because revolving funds, as we'll get into, sort of depend on there being a depressed value that then you improve upon. So, but tell people about revolving funds and sort of like the major characters in the Historic Savannah story that brought this all together.
Yeah, so the basic revolving fund, the one that HSF kind of pioneered in the 50s, 60s, is we would just buy, as you said, depressed property in downtown when nobody really wanted to be down here. To a certain extent, we'd stabilize it, and then we'd find a preservation-minded buyer, and they would buy it from us and then renovate it. And we would take a facade easement to ensure that the appearance and those key features were preserved in perpetuity, and that just kind of took off. The way that it developed was the 7 ladies who founded HSF. And there's 7 very community active, community oriented women came together to save the Davenport House when it was under threat. They had just pretty much said, you know what, enough's enough. Let's put this together. Realized that they could raise money effectively and started raising money so they could save more historic properties. And it took off. And then, one of their kind of progeny, Lee Adler, this just massive personality and kind of forebearer of the preservation movement in the United States, comes along, and like he's the one that really starts proselytizing. He publishes books about it, and he's talking about HSF and what the economic impact of the revolving fund is or was for Savannah at that time. He comes along, and it really takes off from there. And we're using the revolving fund in more ways than just buying property and turning it back into, something that's habitable with a preservation minded buyer. The money that exists within the fund is being used to, and with facade loans, with historic surveys, and recognizing where historic districts are so that we can continue using the fund in these other places around town. And it's just kind of existed that way since. And it's been extremely effective. But, again, now that we're in a different economic question, we're sitting here saying, what is the right thing for us to do? And we're actually kind of looking around at the other revolving funds in the country and seeing how innovative people have gotten with their programs.
Yeah, I mean, and Lee, just for going back to that for a second, was the gentleman who came up to Baltimore and spoke and proselytized and all that kind of thing. And he's got an interesting story, of course, as well, and is even kind of captured in the public consciousness too. But the idea makes sense. But today, as you say, what we're kind of dancing around is that when property is really, really expensive, there's not as much opportunity for sort of a more traditional revolving fund to jump in. So it creates the need for like different products or different ways of doing this. And facade loans and those sorts of things are interesting because now it's almost like, is this a preservation tool that could be utilized more broadly for sustaining affordable housing? Right? Like the easiest affordable housing to create is the affordable housing that already naturally exists. But oftentimes people can't stay in it because they can't afford to maintain it. And so it's not just an acquisition issue that you have with affordable housing, but it's a maintenance issue. And so that's why it's interesting to hear Historic Savannah, which was at sort of the forefront of the big, bold revolving fund side, now thinking about sort of these like micro revolving fund investments. Are you still, though, buying buildings? And if you are, where are those? Are those in the places that when people think of Savannah in their mind are visiting, or have you changed neighborhoods and locations as well?
Yeah, we're still buying buildings. Actually, had a revolving fund committee on Wednesday thinking about some potential property. At this moment, we're not geographically focused. We do have two properties. One is in Carver Village, which is in West Savannah. And the other is in the West Savannah neighborhood proper, actually near the site of the Weeping Time, for those who are familiar with that site. And both of them have offered, interesting questions where we're having to sit back and really think about kind of the motivation and the philosophy that we have with the model that we're operating with right now, which is more of a developer mindset. The Carver Village piece is really interesting because it is listed to the National Register. It tells a story of a African-American neighborhood that was able to beat redlining and that was able to find different ways to develop a neighborhood and housing for themselves in a time where that was really difficult. And so it's a cool place to be because it's underrepresented and not really thought of. And so if a tourist was here, the only reason they would go over there is if they were going to go see a concert at the in-market arena. The arena and the neighborhood are really close together. But we are looking at other places, like a neighborhood called Collier Brownville. There are other nonprofit organizations who are operating similar funds, similar revolving funds here in Savannah, not to mention just a plethora of pretty good affordable housing developers as well. So I mean, it's a really competitive market for something that is mission driven in the way that the revolving fund is. And like I said, we're having to rethink models. Do we take a historic Macon Foundation approach? When I was in graduate school, I met Ethiel Garlington and Josh Rogers through a lecture, a talk that they gave to one of my classes. And that's when I really recognized, oh man, like we can be a powerful tool for good and change through how we see these revolving funds and how we're using them, and what Macon was able to do through the College Hill neighborhood, and even their plan with Newtown Macon. At playing that developer role, it is interesting, but like, does that really apply to Savannah and where Savannah is right now? maybe in pockets here and there where we can stabilize and revitalize blocks, but maybe not from an entire neighborhood, especially when there's other organizations working there. And then the other thing is the facade loan program, just listening to people who own historic houses, whether they're in the landmark district or whether they're down, like in Parkside or Ardsley Park or somewhere like that, a neighborhood that was built in the 30s, listening to what they are going through just to make sure that they're compliant with whatever historic regulations are there and how expensive materials are. Like, can we provide really cheap financing for them to take care of their properties, and then use that again over in like a Kyler Brownville or a Carver Village where they really need cheap financing and resources to help take care of those properties, because that honestly means like whether or not that homeowner is going to stay in that house or can stay in that house or even just realize the value of that house in the long term. So it's a lot of questions.
Yeah, and that's the financing. Well, not just financing. There's a lot of social questions and nonprofit questions and capacity and all that kind of thing. But that's on the sort of the property side. And then, but you kind of were even mentioning, like there are opportunities for revitalization and redevelopment. And this is where preservation crosses over between preservation and growth and smart growth and, more sustainable growth patterns. And I know that, like the Historic Charleston Foundation, we've had Winslow on before, and talked about what the work that they're doing and how that oftentimes, because a place like Charleston is so beloved and the market is so hot, they're having to get involved in a lot of those conversations. Is that advocacy side of the organization also changing for Historic Savannah? Are you getting pulled into more of those conversations about redevelopment of sort of non-conforming structures or places that, the question is, well, what comes next? Are there as many opportunities in Savannah for that? And where does preservation fall in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, Savannah, that's professional sport is preservation. So everybody who's civically minded is cued in to what's going on from a development side. And there are some really active folks who are, at every single historic preservation commission or historic district board of review, which oversees the landmark district meeting, calling out new construction, new development, and what's happening. And HSF has always been in that space. A lot of the reason is because we are directly investing in those places. And now that's changed a little bit, but we do our best to get in front of investors, builders, developers who are thinking about building in the historic districts before they even have to get into the regulatory stream, because of how hot and contentious it has gotten here. And it seems to be that's a pretty productive place for us to live, since we have those friendships and those connections with the financiers and the architects and the designers to get there and help them kind of navigate that process. At the same time, we'll stand up and say no if no needs to be said. And that's just kind of the nature of how it goes, especially within the landmark district. And then, I don't know, I was listening to an episode the other day talking about kind of the policy, a PreserveCast the other day, talking about the policy and how married preservation is to federal policy, and thinking about that in the context of Savannah. And we're in this weird place right now, a good place right now, where everybody's saying the same thing. I think everybody's kind of unhappy with how the game is being played here, and it's time for us to rethink it. And very preliminary conversations have started about it. And I'm really interested and really optimistic to see what comes out of these conversations, because it seems like for me just coming into Savannah, not having some of the longstanding connections that a lot of people have, that everybody's saying the same thing, but not everybody knows how we need to get on the same page. And like, that's where Historic Savannah Foundation lives. is being that big table and that place where we can have a constructive conversation on what is the best path forward for preserving all of the vital historic places in Savannah, and thinking about Savannah for the long run.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right. That was a conversation. I think you're referencing the one with Jeremy Wells, where we were sort of talking about how, is that the model that works? And obviously, that model is changing at the federal level as well at the same time. And so there's going to be a question in a lot of different communities about how they want to handle preservation in their own community and what needs to respond. I'm curious for people listening who hear that when you say everybody agrees that they don't like it. What is if you could call out, like, what are the top 3 things they dislike the most that everybody agrees we should fix? We just don't know what comes next.
It's just difficult. The review process is just difficult.
Review, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, citizens don't like that. They feel like they have to fight everything all the time. Designers and developers don't like that. They feel like they have to fight citizens all the time because, I mean, they are, for the most part, good actors and doing the best they can to follow the code. But the code itself can be difficult to navigate. So it's not necessarily just the review process, but it's the code itself. And so, I think every city at some point or another has these issues, especially with, for us, our design guidelines are, and the preservation code was passed in 2009. I mean, so we're approaching 20 years of use here, and it's time for us to sit down and rethink it and reevaluate it.
Right, and a lot can change in that time, and just like you said, on the materiality side as well. This is something that struck me as we got more involved in property work, and really the nitty gritty of it is that sometimes the exact same material, if you're replacing it, a modern material is inferior. So I'm thinking of like wood and things like that, where you should replace wood with wood, but the wood that you can get your hands on today is so lousy that it's going to create a maintenance problem within just a few years. And so then you get kind of trapped in this conversation about, like, is that what we should be doing? Should we be using a replacement material because it can survive so much longer? Because you can't force someone to buy, the Lexus when they can only, afford the Honda, and so, or is it fair to say to someone, no, you have to have wood, even though we know that type of material, that siding it's going to melt away in 6 years, and you'll just have to replace it then as well. And is that what we want to use preservation as a tool for? Is that really the ultimate goal? And I think it's coming back to, like, what are we here for, folks? Yeah. Because sometimes we lose the thread. And I've referenced this a couple of times, that I feel like, this idea of, the abundance crowd, the group that read that Ezra Klein book about abundance, and, like, how do we get to building again and doing things again? And how do we get to preserving and doing it in a way that our communities are really excited about it? Because it doesn't sound like there's great excitement about when you have to take a project through review at this point in the city of Savannah. So that's probably the same elsewhere. So I think, once again, the Historic Savannah Foundation has an opportunity to lead on this, because everybody's looking for an answer. So once you get the answer, Collier, we'll have you back, and you can just give it to everybody, and you'll be like Lee Adler. You'll go across the country proselytizing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're just going to try and figure out how we can build better buildings in Savannah.
All right. Well, if you figure that out, let us know, because that would be helpful too. So I know that you said that you kind of dabbled in this idea of public history and preservation early on, and we're approaching, and we're in now, this moment of great public history and preservation conversations because of the 250th anniversary of the country. So 2026 is this semi-quincentennial year. For a lot of preservation groups, we probably could do a whole episode just on this. There are so many that either got started in 76 or right after 76. I mean, our industry was directly impacted. I'm sure your grandmother was, put some awesome bicentennial events together. I'm sure, almost positive of it.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's obviously important for us. So many of us have our eyes on so many different issues that, adding one more thing to the plate is challenging. But what are you hoping to see come out of the 250th? Is Historic Savannah planning anything around that? Are you trying to kind of hitch your wagon to other aspects of it? What does the 250th look like for your organization?
I'll be honest, we're actually looking and focusing on the 300th for Savannah, and that's in 2033. That being said, the Davenport House and Danielle Hody's the director over there, has really taken this one on. And we're working with a national organization. Forgive me, I cannot remember the name of it now because this project just kicked off. But we're building a wish wall. It's going to be outside the Davenport House on Habersham Street, and we've engaged with some middle school student government students who are student government representatives for their school to build this thing and design this thing and create this public art project where people can come in and talk about what they want to see in the next 250 years in America. And it's a really incredible opportunity and a really cool project for us to do. We're also supporting the Georgia Trust and their really cool project where they're going around the state of Georgia and looking at all of the Revolutionary War sites across the state and talking about that history. I think the most recent one was on the Haitian soldiers monument in Franklin Square here in Savannah, and talking about the siege of Savannah in 1777. So right now we're focused on the wish wall and then supporting everybody where we can who's doing anything else.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all of us are trying to figure out what our role and what our lane is in this. But yeah. I mean, I guess there's also this hope that, like in 1976, there is sort of an inspiring moment that comes out of this. And that's why I think, public history projects like the Wish Wall and things like that are so important, because it gives us an opportunity to sort of engage the community in that.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing that goes back to the Davenport House being a third space in the community. So we're creating community connection there. I was explaining to someone the other day that the Davenport House is one of our examples of adaptive reuse. And it just happens to be a public history use and telling the story of Savannah and Savannians in that way. And the Wish Wall is that next kind of connector, right, to creating that third space and bringing people together.
Before we go, we normally ask people about their favorite historic place or site, which is generally a pretty difficult one to ask, but we'll ask it and see where this leads us.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to talk about Montgomery because of what Montgomery is in the nation's history and everything that happened there. There's a really cool place. It's the Court Square Fountain. It's this old artesian well right there in the middle of town, and the way that you can pretty much tell the country's history from that corner, and see up to the Capitol, see the office where the Ordinance of Secession was kind of broadcast out from the telegraph office, and then the order to fire on Fort Sumter was given from that office too, and then to know that almost 100 years later, the Voting Rights March walked right past that building and through Court Square. It's just a really powerful place because you can see how much the country has changed. I mean, and just down the street from it is where Rosa Parks was arrested. And so there's just so much happening right there and such a vibrant story to tell.
Yeah, I think we come back time and time again here to this idea that layers of history make places the most interesting, and those layers there are phenomenal. I don't think I realized that the order to fire on Fort Sumter was given from there, but it makes sense because that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the capital of the Confederacy at the time. So I guess all the orders came from there. Well, for people who are more interested in your work, they're coming to Savannah and they want a good experience. They want to go to the Davenport House. What would you, where would you send them? We can put links in the show notes, but what's your recommendations on Savannah? And if they want to learn more about your organization, where do they find all that?
Yeah, so you can find out more about us at myhsf.org. Definitely visit the Davenport House. The Ships of the Sea Museum, which is a revolving fund house, actually, is an incredible and cool place if people are interested in the maritime history of Savannah. Also, take a visit to the Starland District. It's an incredible story and how a community can take on its own destiny and see development that it wants and create a really cool, vibrant place that is community oriented. So I think those would be my two big recommendations. And then always go out to Tybee, watch the sunset.
Yeah, Tybee cannot be missed. Well, Collier, we'll make sure that we have links in the show notes so people can find out about your organization, check in on your projects, what you're working on, and consider making a donation to a group out there doing great work. It's been fun having you on, and we'll have you back when you figure everything out with regulatory reform. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.